But just to say that it's a great honor to be here, and thank you so much, Meta, and the entire team which has been working day and night to really have this conversation. And I really want to thank all of you to come on this Saturday morning to listen to the story of how we have arrived with the 1-year anniversary now of the adoption of the Sustainable Development Goals. So before I go further, I actually want to engage with you, and it was good that you got everybody to sit together. I want you to find a partner next to you. Find somebody next to you. Get closer. And this interesting game will have 3 rounds. So in the first round, get into the arm wrestling position, everybody, including you, sir, please. Get onto the arm wrestling positions. Everybody, you can, yes. Melinda's here, I didn't realize. Okay, so round number 1. You can turn your seats, mutate the way you want. Okay, so the first round, remember, everybody, remember that, are you participating? Please, can I invite everybody to participate because it has a meaning? I really want everybody to participate. It's great it has to be more interactive. So round 1 is you have to, every time you win is by touchdown, remember, right? So we're going to do round number 1. 1, 2, 3, touchdown. Okay, thank you. Can I invite you to take your positions again, everybody? Take your positions again. And listen in, please. We'll do round number 2 now. And again, take your positions, please, ma'am, right there. Yes, you can do 3. Yeah, this is lovely. Now, when you do touchdown now, here's a clue to you. Think win-win. Okay? We'll do the same. Think win-win. Okay? So we'll do the touchdown, but now you're going to think win-win. Okay? I can see some people who already got it in the room. So 1, 2, 3. Think win-win, everybody. Think cooperation. Can everybody see this duo right here, our friends here? Can you show them what you're doing? Can you give them a big round of applause? And I'll do the 3rd round at the end of my session. Remember, we cannot achieve sustainable development goals with a deadlock. We cannot achieve the 17 goals if you're going to stuck like this. Because most of us are conditioned and socialized that when we are challenged, our egos comes into place at an individual level, but also at the members level. And that is the journey of the evolution of the Mdgs to the SDG process. And I want to say this right up front that SDG 17 is the reason why we are having this session today. My colleague there, Melinda, Meta, and others have collaborated to ask me to come because without collaboration and partnerships, you cannot attain peace. It's quite a coincidence. Meta, I'm born on the Peace Day, 21st September. So I always feel that, me and my twin sister have some kind of a messages happening around. But really, I think the critical part of the MDG, which was highly criticized, was the MDG number 8. Because people felt that the global partnerships did not really come into play. There was a deadlock between the developing world, the developed world, the donor community, and the recipient countries, but also amongst civil society actors, governments, private sector, academics, individuals. And I think that is really, if you look at the, how many of you have read the Agenda 2030 document? So if you look at the operational paragraph of this document, it actually starts with SDG 17. But I'm not going to do a lecture on this because it's a very, very interesting document, but I'm going to talk about the story. So the story really is about this movement of what were the lessons learned coming out of the MDG process, which was seen as a very important breakthrough, but many people criticized because top down. There were 8 white men mostly sitting in New York and some other parts of the world coming together and telling the world what the goals should be. So when we were working on as part of the UN Development Group, we were given a challenge. When this was given out there by Ban Ki-moon, I must say that he really deserves a lot of appreciation. He challenged the UN system, which is highly bureaucratic and very complicated at times, said, enough. If we want to evolve at the next goals, and we didn't know what these goals will be called, we must make sure that this evolution is bottom up, it's participatory, inclusive, and also based on gender equality and respect for diversity. And then he says, and drops the bomb and says, I have no money because we're in the middle of the financial crisis. So there were 4 important things that UN system engaged with lots of support from, and I'm going to take you through some digital work, which we worked on 4 or 5 big chunks. One, of course, which you probably know of, is the appointment of a high-level panel on the post-2015 development agenda. These were international experts who were appointed to look at, what should be the next set of development goals. So that was fairly easy. They were, of course, always challenged and things. But this was really a consultation that was created. About 4 consultations took place. The first one was extremely criticized because it did not engage with civil society. It did not engage with women's organizations, youth organizations, people with disabilities, LGBTQI communities, and others, and was happening in this own bubble. But then it soon evolved because people said, you cannot replicate the same issues. Let's open up the process. And I think my very good friend Lisa, who's part of the civil society outreach, then took this on and got, for the first time in a high-level panel conversation, got civil society engaged with these experts and said the real experts are people out there. So let me show you an interesting website. But just to tell you the story, so if you go to the website, theworldwewant2030.org, it actually became the first data dashboard ever created for this huge intervention to bring all the conversations in. So let me show you what it looked like. So one of the biggest challenges given to us was that let's look at bringing online consultations and see that where are all these different conversations that have taken place. So what we basically did was we looked at data sets that were inspired by, let me make this smaller. Can you see that? So every single consultation that have taken place by the UN system and outside the UN system, NGOs and everybody else beyond 2015, 84th World, the UNDG dialogues and implementation, every part, including the World We Want Children, and the conversation with UNDG thematic dialogues, which I'll talk about later, everything sits here. So this was the qualitative input that we generated. So in aggregation, we reached out about 1.5 million voices from 193 countries. And if we just go into the topic of discussion today, which is peace, and you go here and see that where was the conversation on peace during the post-2015 development agenda. So what you see on the left side is the bubble infographics. On the right side, you see all the different submissions that have happened in the last 3.5 years on why peace was so critical. So this is one part of our conversation, was to get online consultations arranged. The online consultations were held in 11 thematic areas, including peace, gender equality, inclusion, governance, energy, climate change, education, employment, and so on and so forth. And all that data sits through open source technology. The second part of our work was going on Twitter, was that UN also wanted to look at social media and understand where is the conversation on UN goals or related areas. So for example, if you pick up areas of, say, I'm just putting this out. So if you just click on any of these on the left side, you can find out that where are the countries that are having conversations on peace as we speak right now. Venezuela is topping the list right now. Then you have Honduras, then you have Panama, El Salvador, Mexico, Spain, Peru, Dominican Republic, and so on and so forth. This is for the information that's happening now. And you can similarly look at the numbers of tweets that they were aggregated. So about 50 million tweets were aggregated into this discussion. And I'm coming to the last one here is the conversation on climate change. And you can see again the conversation that's happening across the world on social media and discussing where is everybody talking about climate change in real time. So what I've spoken is we had the high-level panel having their consultations, we had thematic online discussions, and then we had this social media input, which also meant that what about the people who don't have access to technology, don't have phones? So UN system invested in about 81 national consultations. So across the world, 81 national consultations were organized. For the first time, these consultations were completely let open. In most of the countries, we had about 300 to 400 or more people who participated. And also the brief that we were part of writing to the UN system, especially country offices, was you cannot make this only a conversation between the UN and the government. You have to go aggressively out there to get the most marginalized group to be part of this. And that, the aggregation also of that sits here. And this is my favorite. The last part of the piece was, the biggest challenge that was given to us was to bring the voices of the most marginalized using a digital survey. But the survey was conducted in 3 formats. One was a paper ballot, like this. The second was to go through a mobile app. And the third one was to just go on the internet. When we started, we were not sure that whether anybody across the world will participate because we had never done something like this. I had done something similar when I worked with UNICEF in year 2001 through a campaign called Say Yes for Children. We generated about 10 million paper votes on Say Yes to Children. There were signatures, and we handed this over to Nelson Mandela. But this was totally new because nobody's done this, nobody has designed something like this. In the end, we of course reached 9.7 million people who participated in this. The second brief to us was that it must be with young people, because this is an agenda of the future. So you cannot just have conversations with people of all ages, but a special focus on children and young people. So out of that number, how much do you think was really young people below the age of 30 who participated and got their inputs in? Any number? 25%. 25%?
70%.
Okay, probably you've seen it there. Sorry?
90%.
90%? Anybody that side? So 73% of people who participated were below the age of 30. And remember that we are speaking to a generation, which is your generation, is the UN still relevant? Are these processes relevant to people? Now, how did we arrive there? That's a very interesting story, which meant that the UN system also has to change the way people engage with themselves, engage with us. We worked on something called the new partners profiles. So you can see clearly open source technology. So we created a specialized URL for people to say that I will champion the My World survey, which is Ban Ki-moon survey. And for example, you can go to SDG Nigeria, and you'll see that they got this URL, which is upstairs, right there on the top, sorry, which is Mdgs NG. They generated 2.6 million votes in Nigeria over 2 years. Now we can also go and find out yet how many of these votes were paper ballots or through website. About 600 from website, ballots, 800,000. And SMS, about 47,000. So this is, this was a very interesting thing, and I want to give you 2 examples because I want to challenge you, because one of my frustrations in working on the post-2015 agenda was getting Canada to move. And I spoke to Melinda so many times, I could never understand that why one of the most amazing countries did not engage. And I'll show you the data from there. Let me show you another very interesting exercise which we did was, in Mexico City, I worked with the Mexico City Youth Institute, and I reached out to the institute and said, during the summer vacation, do you want to work? We are sitting in Toronto University right now. I said, can we give young people a project? And they said, what? I said, let's train 3,000 youth volunteers in Mexico City to go out there in favelas and to do paper ballots for My World Survey. So can anybody take a wild guess at how many votes came from Mexico at the end of this 4 months exercise?
500,000?
500,000? Anybody else?
Million?
Yeah. 1.4 million. 90% of the data that came was paper ballot. Mexican young people took on the streets, and Mexico City is one of the biggest cities, right? They took onto the streets, they went into favelas, they stopped people on the street. They asked students, it was totally intergenerational. In fact, in India, where I come from, one of my favorite moments is this adolescent girl, she's about 16-year-old, and she's having a conversation with a woman who's about 85 years old and asking her great-grandmother, that I'm about to enter a vote. What is that you think the world leaders should prioritize? It was also intergenerational, it was peer-to-peer, it was also youth asking children to participate. In Cameroon, our close friend Divine reached out to people with disabilities and said, can we have a conversation about what the world leaders are talking about? So if you look at the pieces that have come through and that's why, before we arrive at SDGs, the process was so important because we wanted to look at bringing every single opportunity, which we were calling is, people's voices, into developing the post-2015 agenda. So now you can actually go into this and you can look at by country to country or region to region. Do you want to see how much out of this 9.7 million, how many votes came from Canada? It's all transparent. Only 19,000. I can't tell you how frustrated I was and how many times, and I hadn't met Meta, and Melinda at that time was very, very sick. And I said, are you kidding me? Canada is only 19,000. So my first request before we leave is, because I don't want this to be a one-day lecture and that's the end of it, is that you have to take a pledge at a personal level that in the My World 2.0, which is called the myworld2030.org, you can go into that website, we invite you to engage with the process. And most of this country is digital, I believe, right? So can we get at least 1 million from Canada? At least 1 million to participate. So my first challenge to you is to take on in your own neighborhoods, in your classrooms, in your campuses, one day or once a month having a conversation and putting this up and doing collective voting. And we'll do a collective voting before we leave the room today. And I'll tell you what that is. So of course, then if you can see that the process was so interesting, so let's go back to the slides. Of course, I talked about the challenge. I'm just getting into I spoke about the world we want collaboration. My slide will be available. Anybody can take this and always reach out to me through Twitter or through my email address. This is the data I spoke about. I didn't realize we have Wi-Fi, so I think live data is better than a presentation. You also have the URLs with all of you. And basically, the challenge started coming to reality because one of the things which happened during the high-level panel conversation was, why should violence against women and girls be a priority? And the room was exactly split like this. People said, no, there's no point discussing peace as a priority. This happened. And one of the eminent people, which is Queen Rania from Jordan, said, guys, wait. Let's look at what people are saying. And they went back into the My World survey, and they looked at, so this is what it generated, by the way. Sorry, I should have showed you the main thing. So these are the world priorities, if you can see them right there. You can also look at by a regional perspective, but also look at from a gender perspective. I'm going to show you what women prioritize. Nothing changes there except that freedom from discrimination moves up. With men, kind of moves down, and gender equality goes down. You can also do this from an age perspective and look at 16 to 30, about 2.6 million, where boys put gender equality as a 10, and girls put the gender equality as an important piece. And this is the reason that I made a shift working for UN Women, because in many countries, when we were looking at the data, we saw very clearly that when young women were asked to prioritize gender equality, they put it as number 3, number 4. And in many countries, including USA, UK, India, young men put gender equality as a number 15th or a number 16 priority. So we were trying to understand the correlation, and that was very critical for the 17 goals. So in the end, what happened was really that the Assistant Secretary General, Amina Mohammed, and her office, really coordinating this on behalf of Ban Ki-moon, worked with different processes, the open working group, and finally pulling everything together as a first draft of this into the 17 goals that are in front of you. Did you receive a card? We gave you the goals, as everybody has the goals? Yeah, fantastic. So let me just tell you, why this agenda is so critical and where we are today. I think one of the biggest shifts in the agenda is that it is universal. So which means that once your Prime Minister agreed on 26 September last year, Canada as a government is in obligation to perform and deliver on 17 goals in Canada, right? Which means that you can go and hold your government to account, and I hope when you do the letter writing session right after this, and say that where are we and how are we progressing in this. So the My World 2030 tool is no longer just a survey now. It's a monitoring tool to see how the governments are performing or are not performing on the implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals. I'll take you through it later. Yeah. So basically, it is very, very clear that in the heart of it is the results framework. That's why it has 169 targets. People think it's insane. 17 goals people think are insane. But I think the process, because so bottom up, so consultative, so open, it came together and said, let's do this. And I remember that many skeptics last year in July, before the summit, said, guys, these will be like 8 goals. Nobody's going to come to 17 goals. But then there was so much of pressure from people's organizations, from women's organizations, from indigenous people's organizations, from everybody, saying that, we must deliver. And people coming out of Rio Summit said, we better make sure that this becomes a huge success. So basically, I think we are very, very clear in the document. It is about the vision and principle. It's a carry forward of the Mdgs' unfinished business. It's based on the principles of human rights. It's based on the principles of peace, which is in the center of the conversation. And of course, very clearly looks into the 3 aspects: social, economic, and environmental dimensions are the center stage of this whole agenda. It has very clear conversations about that. It's just not we'll implement, but also put a mechanism through the HLPF on the follow-up implementation. So this year in July, 20 governments who volunteered and said, we will report that where we are. And now they've encouraged everybody else to report back next year in July as the countries are progressing. What we have done as a UN system is said, in that reporting back process, let's put it out to public. Let people come and see whether they see that this is being implemented or not. And where are we as, from a people's perspective, we see we are arriving in this country. So the myworld2030.org is that space for you to work with, to look at where you are performing or not performing. So again, I think I've spoken about this. I'm looking at the time I have. So of course the conversation, just to look at the evolution, some of who are veterans and seniors in the room, they of course know this much better than me, is that how the conversations earlier on was having the Social Development Summit, having the economic sustainability conversation, and the environmental sustainability all separated. The whole idea was in the 1980s that, can we attempt to bring it together? And that attempt was made, I would say, clear to, during the Rio summit 20 years ago, there was a clear realization, we need to come and make this together. So the biggest achievement really from a humanity perspective is that by 2015, the 5 Ps, which are the heart of this conversation, happened, which was people, partnerships, planet, prosperity, and peace. And we said if we don't bring all the 5 Ps together, we'll continue to have these different worlds. And that's one of the biggest challenges we've had in the world in the last few decades. So what do we arrive at? So just to take you through it. So of course the big ambitions in the vision are about people, end poverty, hunger in all their forms and dimensions, protect the planet from degeneration, prosperity, ensure that all human beings can enjoy prosperous and fulfilled lives, peace, foster peaceful, just, inclusive societies which are free from fear and violence. And partnerships, which is of course one of my favorite, is mobilize means required to implement this agenda through revitalized global partnership with participation of all countries, all stakeholders, and all people. So if you look at the declaration, right, the UN Charter, after very long times, after 70 years, the people came back into the global conversation, and people-centered approaches and people in the conversation were coming in. And I must say this happened because of the entire bottom-up consultative process, and that was really appreciated by both the member states, but also by civil society actors who often feel neglected and left out of the conversation. I think all of you know the goals. I hope you can memorize them. If you can't, they're pretty colorful. We'll do some interesting. And of course, everybody has their own favorite, And as a feminist, I always say that, wearing my feminist lens, I say, look, it's great you can implement goal number 8 or whatever, but remember, you can't implement or achieve the 17 goals with one eye closed. You have to have the stronger focus on women and girls. And if you look at the document, it has gender equality with a clear focus on women and girls empowerment right there in the centerpiece, in the preamble. Because we know that the last set of goals, although there was MDG goal number 5, that we have been failing our women and girls across the world, including in your country. So it's not that you're sitting in Canada and you've achieved gender parity, but I think because of the pro-feminist government, which we highly appreciate, now we see the shift. And we welcome, by the way, the investigation on the violence against indigenous women, which we're very happy it's happening finally. So basically what you see here is really the unfinished business. And then of course, then you see the new areas that come very clearly: energy, growth and jobs, infrastructure, inequalities, peace, global partnerships, again being re-emphasized here. And finally we arrive at this iconic, this is a very nice, one of my favorite infographics ever created, to look at how do we really bring this together into this. So what's new? It's universal. I just said, it's no longer just a developing world. All 193 member states have to deliver on all 17 goals. And we have 14 years left. We've lost 1 year. Ideally, I should have come here last year, October. But thank you for inviting me to speak here. The integrated, we see very clearly the convergence of you cannot have one and leave the other one out. Transformative, that's the whole idea, that we need to transform and evolve as we move forward. Ambitious, yes, people think they're over-ambitious, and there are people on both sides. So I'm like, let's look at half glass full and let's be ambitious so we can deliver on this. And that's what you have. You have the 17 goals in front of you. I'm going to pause here and take some questions before I get into the next part of what is coming now. So any reflections, any thoughts? Yes, sir.
Would you say these goals are ordered in terms of priority, or is it kind of just like all at once?
No, I think it's not the priority. That's how it kind of evolved. And but definitely I would say that goal number 1 is very clear that we have to eliminate poverty from this planet. I think people felt very, very strongly about that. There is, of course, in the design, the MDG carry forward. So if you go back here to the earlier slide, in a way you will see the priorities coming through the MDG, and then the new ones coming down. And then finally the MDG 8 is reflected as SDG 17, but in a much more strengthened way. So I would say that for me, although they're numbered, for me, I see them all at the same level. And of course, wearing my gender lens, I see goal number 5 very critical because it is integrated, it cuts across everything. Goal number 16 is very critical in this agenda because you cannot achieve sustainability without peace, and you can't achieve peace without sustainability. So those are some interesting nuances there. Any other question, please? Yes, ma'am.
This is a question regarding justice. So we know that a lot of the areas that require most of the work are very hard to reach areas. For example, for gender equality, a lot of these areas have deep-rooted cultural reasons for the gender equality. And it requires systemic change from within. So is there an example of this happening right now where we're reaching these areas that are hard to reach and we're dealing with the systemic inequalities?
So you can see the smile because it's one of my favorite areas too. So let me walk you through the implementation from what my dear friend here has said about, let's dive deeper into one goal, and let's take goal number 5 as an example. The evolution of goal number 5, which is to attain gender equality and empowerment of all women and girls. And all is very critical because, in the UN system, the all can be put all, which means the LGBTQI community and all the other minorities, disabilities, indigenous, and it's always challenged with different governments challenging that. So that is one big accomplishment, to have a very clear, inclusive, all women and girls as the ambition. I think one of the biggest achievement was that the women's organizations who've been working day and night, and the newly established UN entity that I belong to, UN Women, and the various colleagues, and especially my boss, who is Lakshmi Puri, and others really worked and said, we cannot miss this opportunity of saying that, can we achieve a timeline for gender equality? Because all studies, including from Harvard, from McKinsey, and from the Citi Research Group in UK, point that the business as usual for gender equality will mean 120 years before we attain gender parity. Now, how do you fast track that? Because one of the problems is political will. So UN Women did something which was impossible, never heard of, was that let's get the heads of states and high representatives together in one room. And I'm telling you, many UN colleagues, that this is not going to happen. Finally, under the leadership of the Chinese premier, because they had hosted the Beijing conference, the 4th World Conference on Women, and it coincided with the summit last year because we were celebrating 20 years of the Beijing Platform for Action. We kind of brought that together, and on one day after 26th, on 27th, the first ever heads of state meeting on gender equality was conducted. 81 heads of state agreed for a timeline and said, we will achieve gender equality, a planet 50-50 by 2030. So the flyer you have, all of you have this flyer, this one-page sheet. If you look at this, I'll do a photo picture later. You have to turn it around, is the planet 50-50 by 2030. And that is the big, on the other side, ma'am, yeah. So that was a campaign that was started to really get heads of states, and we published all the commitments made by heads of states in the public level. But that's really at the policy, at the political level, but how do you make that a reality? UN Women is now working on its FPIs, which are flagship publications in line with the targets and indicators. For example, in the SDG 5, you have a very clear target to eliminate all forms of violence against women and girls. You have a very clear target on ending all forms of harmful cultural practices, including early marriage and female genital mutilation. We have again another target which talks about economic empowerment and developing entrepreneurship, including investing in STEM and STEAM and innovation for women and girls. And this language was not there in MDG 5, in the goal number 5 at all, from MDG 3. So of course the challenge is that how do we do this? And I think for us there are different levels. One is at the intergovernmental level, because when we used the climate conference in Paris to say that you cannot talk about climate change and the COP21 if you don't look at it from a gender perspective. So you got another entry point there. And finally, at the Commission on Status of Women, which has been celebrated for 60 years now, we put on all this aggregation into one outcome document, which is, one second. So for goal number 5, I'm going to circulate this, you can look at it, it's available and you can download this, is what we call now the Gender Compact. The Gender Compact basically looks into the conversation of Addis Ababa financing for development, and very clearly for the first time getting all the finance ministers to commit and say that they will up the investment in women and girls in their countries, but the ones who are the OECD DAC countries will also increase their ODAs on investing on women and girls. That's one part. Second, of course, the SDGs themselves, the COP21 declaration, then the Commission on Status of Women and the Commission for Population Division, which talks about reproductive health rights of women, was all pulled together into this document, and I'm coming to the implementation. What does it look like in reality? So UN Women, for example, for its Fund for Gender Equality, which is a small fund, has initiated grassroots level initiatives with women so that they're, and I'll give you one example of the moringa plant. You're aware of what is moringa? It's like a quinoa comes out of Africa. It's a cash crop. So we've been now working with women entrepreneurs in rural Benin and other parts there to really equip them in entrepreneurship training, but also work with them on legal literacy and financial inclusion to create their social enterprise, so that moringa plant, which is a cash crop where they were totally marginalized and the profits were actually taken away by traders, are in a much, much better position to negotiate. So let me show you one interesting example here. It's a small video. It's like you're intuitive, you were thinking of asking this question and I was ready. So this is the goal number 5. So I think where we are is right now is we have looked at the targets and indicators. We are actually on 22nd of September this year, we're working with Gates Foundation to look at better data systems so that we can actually report on the progress, because one of the most underfunded global agenda is gender equality. And we've been making very strong cases across the world for people to say that UN Women, which was created during financial crisis, is a shot from the ambition of 500 million. We have just about $220 million agency. And one of my jobs is fundraising, by the way, is to bring more investments. But I think the biggest challenge was to get the governments to really be held to account. And the biggest strength we have, I would say, is that we are rich on money, poor on resources, but we are very rich on partnerships and women's organizations. So the process really is that through the 90 country offices, through UN's system-wide action plan on gender equality, we're looking at how these 11 targets, which are very clearly linked under goal number 5, can be achieved. And the existing work which is happening can be consolidated under this. Now, in terms of your systemic challenges, which is really patriarchal system and the hegemonies of masculinities, I've been doing a lot of work myself, and I was inspired by one of the most amazing Canadians I've ever met in my life, Michael Kaufman from the White Ribbon Campaign. UN Women is about to embark on writing its global strategy on working with men and boys. I'll be writing that very shortly. But we've also launched the He for She campaign. How many of you know of the He for She campaign? Many of you do, yes. So it's a campaign really at the sensitization level to bring men in the room to say that, I'm a he for she because I challenge the toxic masculinities, but in the same domain of the spectrum of masculinity, there are men who actually condemn violence. And I really want to look at masculinities that are about respect, dignity, justice, inclusion, and non-violence. Whether it's violence against women or violence against another race, I totally condemn that. That's the culture we're trying to evolve. And that's, I would say, one of the most challenging thing for us But we have arrived there because we had never had a UN system or an agency taking on patriarchy the way we are slowly embarking on now. And honestly, between us, we are pretty inspired by your Prime Minister and many other Canadians. And I really hope that Canada as a country would champion SDG 5. And it seems so because there's a lot of enthusiasm, and including in your recent international aid assistant review, you very clearly put in your country, since you're writing this letter to the Prime Minister, I really recommend that you read your International Aid Assistant Review website, because you are one of the very clear countries which have said that the next phase of International Aid Assistant Review will be based on SDGs and with a special focus on women and girls. Similarly, without naming the governments, we have many other governments who have come back and said that we will increase our focus on this. We will get deeper into the conversation on climate change, for example. So what you're seeing is that there is this entire renewed enthusiasm of looking at gender equality, really, and also excitement to see that from the local to the local and the local to the global level. I call it the global, the global phenomena happen. And the challenge will always be about the missing data, the problems of resources, the finance, and of course, ensuring that the political will is sustained if the leadership changes. And that is something that's a huge challenge. We are very strongly advocating for a woman SG. So UN system is also, UN Women is also advocating within the UN system, telling people that can we have the next Secretary General to become a woman. So there are different dimensions of it, and I'm happy to bilateral with you on this. I don't know if the video will still play, but we can come back to the presentation. Anybody else? Yes.
You said that there's a big evolution in the partnership goal from the MDGs to the SDGs. Could you elaborate on kind of what's changed, and especially 1 year out, what types of efforts are put in place on the partnership angle?
I think the biggest example of SDG 17 is that 193 heads of states agreed to a global document. Arriving to that 17 goals with all the sensitivities of different governments putting different agenda is an example that they finally agreed on that. Second, I think from the private sector, and I specifically want to talk about the role of UN Global Compact. I don't know if Aparna is in the room. Aparna? Okay, my colleague from UN Global Compact Canada will probably come in. They played a very critical role. They actually reached out to all the UN Global Compact signatory companies and said, because you felt alienated and you were not part of the MDG process, do you want to come in? And they used that process of doing consultations, and the outcome of the consultations, by the way, are available on the World We Want 2015 website, 2030 website. Sector, and will come through innovation and will also respond to the challenges of the 17 goals. So what they did was they actually posed the 17 goals out there, which are basically a problem statement, and said that what could be the innovative and business solutions to achieve these. Second, you saw very clearly coalitions emerging which were missing. One example will be persons with disabilities, which actually felt absolutely alienated in the MDG process. There was no mention on disabilities in the MDGs. Whereas the coalition, which was chaired by this amazing guy from Serbia, Vladimir, he pulled together an accountability coalition to ask and say that, will you really deliver on persons with disabilities? Because 19% of the human population right now has some form of disability or the other. And so they've created an accountability alliance. The TAP network, which is a transparency, accountability, and participation network by the World Federation of United Nations, WAFUNA, has brought together many organizations and coalitions to focus on SDG number 16, on peace, on ending violence. And now this is the difference, that coming from the MDG generation, to the SDG, you saw that in the MDG process, there were hardly global conversations. There were hardly local conversations. They were very UN-centric and very UNDP or some specialized UN agency-centric. And now the conversation has gone to people because people are also looking at if these goals are being implemented. There was no tools, there was no My World, there was no World We Want, there was nothing. And that's why, you know, the next slide which I have, I'm sorry I'm jumping into the next one, the whole idea of the My World 2030 is to create this global citizenship, citizens awareness, which is the target number 4.7 of the goals, which for the first time has a language about people-centered opportunity, and said that you cannot achieve these 17 goals if people are not engaged. And it goes further and says it is all women and girls and the most marginalized communities in that target. So here's an opportunity for you to make that a reality on partnership, is to participate first. Yes?
Do you have any other anecdotes you can share about how the votes were taken into account? You shared the anecdote about the Queen of Jordan, looking at what are people talking about.
Oh my God, my favorite anecdote is, which surprised many people. Let me show you. I'll go back and come back to the slide and talk about the SDG thing. One of my favorite anecdotes is this one, which is from young people. And this surprised many people, you know, and this is one of the most contested targets and goals was when young people were asked to prioritize out of these 16 priorities. So the process was simple. I'll just tell you how it looked like. So it was, if I'm a civil society organization and I want to do the My World survey, either I organize a consultation like this, ask do group ranking, or basically you know, ask people to go and look at the communities. So what we have here is, it was amazing. I mean, this is one of my favorites. Sorry, I'm remembering one of the most controversial ones was when young people took on the priorities from the overall education came as number one. But many parts of the world, amongst young people, honest and responsive government came as number 2 or number 3 or number 4 priority. And a lot of people came back and said, you know, what do you mean that young people are saying we are dishonest, especially member states? Yeah? And it was not that it was coming from Venezuela or India, it was also from your country, it's number 4. You know, if you look at the 19,000, and if you go back to your previous administration, you know, or USA, number 2. And that surprised many people and said, you know, are young people really watching? And if you go back to the Twitter analysis and Twitter feed here, and I just look at, well, interestingly, it's honest and responsive government. So if you look at the heat map of honest and responsive government and see where it is, where is the conversation? And if you look at the heat map of gender equality, so this was the beauty of the exercise. What I'm trying to tell you is that we use all different permutations and combinations coming back to the honest and responsive government. And that's why SDG 16 has a very specific target about accountability. MDG did not talk about accountability. And this was the reason why people said, you know, and it also came to the national consultations, the thematic discussion on governance, which UNDP led. There were many young people across the world said, you know, we want to see more transparency. We want to see accountability. We want to see people's participation in creating a culture of accountability. So that's one. I have many others. I can go on. And I think the other one would be the consolidation of the issues of climate change. And I think there it came very, very strongly, and because people are not sure whether this should be part of the SDG process and should maintain its focus on COP processes. And there it actually worked very well because you saw very clearly different targets and linkages across the SDGs looking at climate change. And this is another highly contested. So when you put the data up, and if you don't want to believe the data, you can't ignore the World We Want 1.5 million qualitative analysis. Okay, you want to ignore that and say, let's look at Twitter, but Twitter is only with the people who have privilege to tweet. You know, you have the offline 81 national consultations and the outcome coming out of there. So there are very interesting anecdotes, and I'm happy to share with you a blog which has been created to look at all these interesting success points on this. Any other question, please, ma'am? Yes?
I understand these goals, they're all very worthy goals. However, you were talking about seeing with one eye, and I have this problem that perhaps the UN is only seeing with one eye. My question to you and to all your UN representatives is, in what way does anti-capitalism intersect with all these different categories you have? You're talking about hunger, you're talking about poverty, you're talking about climate change, you're talking about gender issues, etc., etc. So, and you're talking about, improving the lives of women, and it all falls into a very liberalized framework. So what are you doing in order to kind of cut through this liberalization and actually talk about anti-capitalism?
It's a very, very deep question, and it's another one of my absolutely necessary one. And I think there, with the shrinking of the civil society in the democratic space, which has become a big reality today, and where actually one of the, although you're saying it's one eye closed, something which we actually got appreciated for was to opening up the space. Because UN system could have actually sat with member states in a closed room and decided what these goals are. But some of us who come from the civil society movement, we said, absolutely not. And I must say, Ban Ki-moon himself said not at all. So what is critical is investment, and investment in strengthening of those civil society organizations that can hold the UN system to account, member states to account, and the private sector to account. And that is what we are really investing in. Within that, my favorite piece that I work on is really investing with youth-led organizations, which has become one of the biggest bulge on this planet and has been most underused resource. And we see that. We see that very clearly. So the biggest success of the My World Survey was youth from rural communities to urban centers. In fact, if you see the My World Survey, you actually have very limited participation of the global north. And people ask me that, why is that? I said, because in most processes, people in the global south were never consulted. And the tools that were created were so technology driven that there was no scope for a paper ballot. If there was, their votes were not being aggregated and put into a global piece. So my piece really would be that, if we can bring some of these capitalist, and of course it's a big issue, and that's another Canadian, I don't know if you've read her book, our favorite, Naomi Kellum, The Shock Doctrine. Has everybody read that? If you haven't, that's the most celebrated author and a thinker about capitalist economies. So really on that, for us would be investments and really having stronger dialogues, because there was no conversation between private sector, member states, UN system, and civil society. And through UN Global Compact and through others, we have now created those for the first time, which are extremely challenging, very controversial, but we said you cannot have this where some capitalist economies and capitalists gain all the time. And SDG 16 is very clear, because the arm production companies will continue to produce those arms and have certain areas engage in conflicts and supply arms to both sides. We are not going to attain SDG 16 with that mindset. There's a question here. Yes, ma'am, please.
Thank you very much. Due to the acoustics here, I unfortunately missed a good deal of what you had to say. What I feel and ask is how each of us, with our limited time and energy, can be involved practically in the realization of these goals. That's what we need to know. We all
Lovely.
want to help
Yes.
to make a difference. But we do have these limitations, personally and otherwise. And I think what we want is a really good indication and guide. How can I be involved in this
Okay.
myself?
Okay, so actually it's a good segue into what I'm going to say next, but I want to give you a very good example, ma'am, of one of the greatest experiences, and going back to the anecdote you talked about. For us, one of the most amazing things which happened was when AARP and HelpAge reached out to us and said, we want to maximize the potential of our senior citizens, and they want to engage in the process. And it was amazing because AARP got 20 amazing senior citizens said they need to be trained into Twitter. They need to be trained into digital advocacy. And guess who was training these people? Not me, I was not there. I only facilitated. 17 to 20-year-old youth activists. I'll send this picture where you'll see the 16 to 70-year-old young women and young men sitting and having a dialogue. So ma'am, and these are amazing, like you ma'am, everybody was enthusiastic that I want to engage. And they especially mobilized because during one point in the My World survey, we were having a challenge of bringing the elderly voices into the survey. And AARP and HelpAge worked on that to bring the voices of young people, with young people bring the voices of the senior citizens. So most practically, where do we go from here? I think there are 4 important areas before I present you where you can immediately go on, and my article will be circulated later. I think the first is have the conversation about sustainable development goals. So this act of sitting and having a conversation. I was speaking yesterday, I was speaking to the Merit 360 Degree, which is one of the biggest youth organizations based out of UK. 1 year from adoption of SDGs, does the world know what the goals are? I mean, look at your own classmates and your own families and your own neighbors. So you first of all start with your own circle of influence by educating, and that's what we say, communicate and amplify the sustainable development goals. And you have no escape as Canada, you are part of it. And as citizens, you can, at Canadian citizenship as a global level, that's where you can. So you can, ma'am, call for meetings with all your colleagues and say that let's discuss sustainable development goals. The second is to take action. And you can take action at different levels because, action could be as simple as, taking on this My World 2030, which is again the very interesting, and I want to show you this 1 second. So if it says, you don't know what the goals are, you can actually go and take a quick video. Oh, sorry. Oh, you can see the thing, sorry. I'm challenged with technology, as you can see. So going back to myworld2030.org, everybody, you can go to the survey and promote it with your colleagues. It's a good way to also understand what the goals are. So asking you whether you know the goals or not, so we say we don't know the goals, okay? So let's say no. So this is the story of the goals. So let's do this together. It'll take less than 2 minutes. Should we? Okay, so let's do this. So it talks about the world leaders in September adopted the goals, Which are the 6 following goals are of immediate concern to you and your family? Can I have anybody who wants to volunteer and we do this together? Anybody here? Yes, ma'am, please, let's do it with you.
Sorry, what was the question?
The question is, out of these 17 goals, it's asking you which of these, select 6 out of these 17 are the most important for you in your context.
Okay, gender equality.
Okay, so let's do this. If people have mobile phones and laptops, you can do your own. Everybody, if you have mobile phones and laptops, you can do this now. So let's say gender equality, yes.
Climate action.
Climate action.
Sustainable cities and communities.
Okay. Did I miss it? Oh, sorry. They're going to kill me. I used to work for UN Habitat.
Zero hunger.
Zero hunger, absolutely.
Clean water and sanitation.
Lovely. One more.
Responsible consumption and production. Peace.
Okay, I'll do one with you also. So let's do this. So I'm going to ask you a question. Would you say that situation of your chosen goals have got better, stayed the same, got worse, over the past 12 months.
So in what context do you want me to look at this? Because,
More from a global context, or you can even look at from your own context, it's fine.
okay, so I'm going to look at it from a global.
Okay, sure.
So in terms of zero hunger, I feel like it's gotten much worse.
Okay,
Like we have not been able to help people around the world at all in terms of food. Gender equality, getting better in some areas, but where it's needed most, we're still lacking.
okay.
Clean water and sanitation, we're working towards implementing some programs. So I would say,
Oh, sorry, so gender equality was better, right? A little better, it's here, sorry.
yeah, sure. Not that good.
I don't know, yeah. Let's keep it here. Clean water, you said was,
I would say just one step up.
okay. Sustainable cities,
Yeah.
happy?
No.
Okay. Responsible consumption,
I feel like we're, in terms of developed countries, we're getting better, but in developing countries where we're not doing good at all, there is no responsible consumption because people are not educated enough.
yeah. So let's keep it in the middle then.
Climate action, we're just starting to get some kind of movement going, so in between,
Yeah?
a little bit less.
You know, there's something wrong with, I don't know what they've done, yeah. Anyways, let's go, you can do it later because there's something wrong with this laptop here. So what does it tell us in the end? Let's look at your female. We can say whatever age, I'm going to say 20. Not asking your age right now. Education,
I'm starting my master's.
okay, so beyond secondary. Country, Canada. You don't need to. Disability, no. And I don't know. So let's sum it. So basically, what will happen is that you will eventually arrive at the new. This is taking you to the back one because we're still aggregating. You'll be contributing to the larger conversation about 2030 agenda. And what comes out of which is in prototype, I don't know why it's not coming, maybe it's an issue here, is a very clear map of where the conversation is right now. Which is here. This is yes. Okay. This is the one you had taken, right? The errors in the doc. So basically, I can send you the toolkit for My World 2030. The idea of the My World 2030 really is to get people to engage, and that's one action. So going back on the question of what can people do, is to take action. You can take the My World survey. You can actually organize consultations on each of these, or have one area that you think is most appealing, and do that. So for example, I will do something with you right now. I do a lot of tweedocracy. So I'm going to ask you to hold the Planet 50/50 in your hand, and we'll actually create an awareness. First of all, if you believe in Planet 50/50 or not. So people at the back, so if we can please have everybody hold the Planet 50/50, and I'm going to take a quick picture here. Excellent. So this is one basic thing of saying that, let me use different ways and take a stand on an issue. Some people take the SDG 16 and wear a peace pin and talk about that, organize on 21st September peace rallies and link it to the conversation. But also with foundations, we're also having conversations on realigning philanthropic OECD DAC investments in this. So one of the challenges we have is the financing for development, which of course is one of the most amazing documents achieved in Addis Ababa, but how do you make it a reality? How do you make it a reality that 0.7% of the gross national income will be allocated to the global ODA so that the least developed countries can move forward? Yeah, so it ranges from those initiatives to the simple micro projects. Another good example would be from Egypt, where UN Women has been supporting another trust fund on ending violence against women and girls, which is linked to target number 5.2 on ending violence, where young women who fall into the age group of 18 to 22 have developed this amazing mobile app. This is a tech place, so this is a good example. If you can download or see whenever you have time, an app called Harass Map, Basically, it uses the Google Maps to look at what are safe and unsafe streets in Cairo. It came as a necessity because of the rapes many women faced during the Arab uprising, where women were coming on the streets, but some of them were raped and groped and sexually harassed during the night. So this girl, Reem, who is a great friend, said, enough is enough. We need to do something with this. She actually mapped what are safe and unsafe spaces. But then what she did was very important. She went to the local governance transportation department and said, this is the way university girls in Cairo think about your public transportation system, your streets and your street lights. These are the areas that need street lights replacement. And will you work with your drivers and conductors on a training that we will do to make them champions on creating a safe public transit? So they just did the mapping, they actually then went there and also then engaged with the private sector, vans, auto rickshaws, taxi services, and big public transportation systems, said, let's have a conversation on public safety. Of course, we've not achieved it, didn't happen overnight and have done it. But as a result of something which was started through a small grant that came out of the money that was provided, they have initiated a revolution which has now gone to 11 cities. And to that, UN Women on the bringing SDG 5 to SDG 11, which is on sustainable cities and the conversation there, we have embarked on this interesting exercise called Safe Cities for Women and Girls. In fact, one of my agenda end of September when I'm back here is to get your mayor, and please tweet this out. We're asking Mayor John Tory to get Toronto to join Safe Cities, the global coalition of mayors to join Safe Cities for Women and Girls. So please tweet that out. Tag UN Women, tag me, whatever you want, we'll tweet it out. Because it's amazing, you're the 4th largest city in North America. And you haven't signed up to say that, let's take measures to make sure that the city is safe for women and girls. In New York City, we did not just do Safe City for Women and Girls. We went a step further, where the Mayor de Blasio created the Gender Equity Commission for New York City, which meant that 50% of all decision-making management positions should be held by women. New York City has made that 53%, which also means the city budget, through the city gender budgeting analysis, has to be reviewed and seen how much of the money the city is actually spending on its women and girls, and how much is it changing their lives. And then from your question about systemic processes, they've initiated the Young Men's Initiative to work with Afro-Latino men on understanding and condemning masculinities, engage with fatherhood program for all men so that they can have a conversation with fathers about nurturing and caring. They've just passed on amazing act to create public spaces for breastfeeding for mothers so that there's safe space in New York City, lactating rooms they've created. And of course, are looking into the programs for early childhood for both mothers and fathers to avail from. So this is just an example to see that, the action can vary from you taking on from your individual perspective to a group perspective, then to a collective. Can Toronto University create the first students' conference on sustainable development goals? Who's stopping you from doing that? Somebody has to initiate this in the room. I can't come because this is not, it is our collective goal and it's not complicated. So we have to start with our own home first. Maybe this is majority of people in this division and the NGOs, the academics and the organizations that you represent. And you can come back and say, then we need to be affiliated. What you do is I'll make sure that you are recognized as a partner to the initiatives we've done. Join the, and this is an offer to you, with Melinda you can have conversation about join the policy strategy group of the World We Want 2030. Create a chapter here. Create a chapter of the World We Want 2030 Canada or World We Want 2030 Toronto. And that's changed from the MDG process because there was nothing to get people engaged. Right? So that second part is take action. The third part is very critical, which is become the eyes and the ears of the implementation. Monitor and evaluate. Maybe some of you want to get into a research exercise and say that 1 year since Canada and it's important, ma'am, for your letter, the next exercise, and it's good segue, is to ask the Prime Minister that 1 year since the adoption, where is Canada? Where are we? And I think that Citizens Watch is so critical, which did not exist in the MDG process. It could be also the women's groups coming together or youth groups coming together and doing a shadow report and saying that this is what, from our perspective, we see missing. Because you saw from the My World survey from 2015, Canada was only 19,000. You can make that 19 million by getting more engaged. And last I always say is that, ultimately what you're demanding or creating is a culture of accountability and consciousness, because having a conversation about SDG, is there something wrong? Do you think any Canadian or any human being will say this is wrong? How it gets implemented or doesn't get implemented is wrong. And that is the biggest challenge, and that's where we call for people's participation and engagement, because without people's participation at different levels, it might move into the track of MDG. And I feel actually a little sad. I mean, we're having this conversation. I hope that we have more and more conversation, and each of you can run this presentation. I'm again giving you this presentation. Everybody here, feel free to take this presentation and remove my name. My victory of this session will be to put your name and that you run this presentation with somebody. So will you make that promise? I don't hear any voice. Will you make that promise? Yes. Please take this presentation. I'm asking my colleagues here to give it to you. Remove my name, put your name, and have a similar conversation with 100 people. That's action. Sorry. Please, you had a question. Anybody else? Yes, ma'am, please.
Could you speak a little about how measurement of progress is?
Sorry?
Could you speak a little bit about measuring progress on the SDGs and how the UN might work with the nations on the national indicators?
That's another 1 hour. So just to say that, in this document you have the different targets, and the targets, I'll send this out to you. All these targets have now this huge list of indicators which has been put together. Everything is online on the UN Sustainable Goals website. Basically, the biggest challenge is the baseline, right? And that's where all these statisticians and all these planners are sitting and saying that let's create a universal baseline and see how we are going to progress. Of course, 1 year is too soon, to see whether the governments are delivering or not. But definitely 1 year is not too soon to know whether Canadians know what the Sustainable Development Goals are. You can write a blog, and on that piece I'll be happy to share bilaterally with you how you can get more engaged on the targets and indicators, and maybe that could be part of the subsequent training to have a deeper dive into those targets and indicators. So just finishing the other slide here is that you have the opportunity, ma'am, again, your question about how we can do, invite you to do the My World 2030 survey, link you to the people so that they can equip you. It's in English and in French. So it's in all 60 UN languages, and World We Want is in 120 different languages. Engage with World We Want, create your own World We Want clubs. Create a World We Want Toronto, and have that conversation and find a place where everybody can convene. Again, that's the website if people can see. It's one of the most interesting websites to go to. And the other URL is wrong to monitor is worldwe2030.org. We kind of evolved since this presentation. And maybe with this, I would like to conclude, because I know that I've gone beyond time. But just to go to the challenge number 3. So challenge number 3 is take your positions, everybody. Everybody take your positions. Find a person and we do an arm wrestling. Please, everybody take your position. Everybody at the back, let's be inclusive and participate. So in the challenge number 2, you thought Everybody in the room, in the challenge number 2, you thought win-win, right? Challenge number 3, for SDGs, think collective action. And I'm going to stress the word collective. Okay? 1, 2, 3. I can see some people got it already. Collective action, everybody. Collective is a collection, not 2 people. Can we see the entire room stand up with their hands connected? Thank you very much, everybody. It's a great honor to be here. Thank you.